I'm basically an economic historian, which doesn't fit quite with the sorts of things that the Property and Environment Research Center does, but I do some of the history of property rights. Basically, there were three faculty members at Montana State, Rick Stroop, John Bodden, and Terry Anderson, that really had the vision for starting PERC. They talked to me about it. I'm not very much of an institutional entrepreneur, and I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. So they went ahead and started it. And then about 6 months later, they asked me if I'd like to be a part of some of the programs. And so at that point, then I did join them. At the beginning, it was a very small shop, but it still carried the same vision that we have now, that conservation is important, that the environment is important, but that the existing structures oftentimes don't do a good job of taking care of those sorts of concerns. So it was started with the idea that markets provide a lot of things, but maybe there needs to be some sorts of refinements or changes to make markets work. And we think of that kind of through a property rights framework, that it is property rights that generate prices, that encourage people to cooperate rather than to be engaged in conflict. So that was the original vision of PERC. And it's still what we're doing almost 40 years later. I think there's a real human desire to be in nature, to be involved with nature. As we become more urbanized, that's expressed in different sorts of ways. But there's a part of the natural world that I think we appreciate by being a part of it. I'd like to see it preserved, but I would like to see freedom also preserved. And so I'm trying to work both of those out. But a lot of my life was spent outdoors. And basically every morning we got up, put on our boots and our hat, and went to work. And so in that working environment, it was a kind of a symbiotic relationship between work and the environment. We saw it as useful, we saw it as beautiful, but we also saw it as productive. And so I grew up in a world in which the environment wasn't our enemy, but it wasn't just necessarily something to be enjoyed in the sense that it also needed to be modified, used, appreciated. I'm delighted that there's now a group of young people that carry on the same vision of trying to create cooperation through markets, but also thinking about how do we get the incentives right? Why do certain sorts of resources get overused? What can we do to try to mitigate some of those problems, increase human cooperation, recognize environmental needs that oftentimes are being ignored by existing structures? There's interesting people here at PERC. There's interesting ideas. So for a person that's officially in retirement, I'm delighted. I can be with interesting people talking and doing interesting things.